Thanks for joining us on KARE News Now. I'm Lauren Lemanchek. Let's get to your headlines. Developing right now, more tariffs being tacked on to goods coming in from China. Today, President Trump announced on Truth Social that the U.S. will impose an additional 10% tariff on China, bringing the total to 20%. The president says the additional tariff will be on all Chinese goods and takes effect on March 4th. That 10% tariff on China is in addition to a 10% tariff that has already been in place since earlier this month. The president also said the 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, which have been paused for a month, will take effect on March 4th as well. A White House official says the reason those tariffs will take effect is that the administration feels there has been little progress on their national security demands, especially on the fentanyl front. Negotiations with all three countries are ongoing, and Mexico's security cabinet will be in D.C. for the next 2 days for meetings with the Trump administration. With the pause on those tariffs coming to an end very soon, local businesses are grappling with how they'll deal with the cost. Raya Katene has their story.
How's it going, Mark?
You don't have to go too far.
Cod would have come in this morning.
To get fresh fish right here in the Twin Cities.
Check it out right here.
In St. Louis Park,
Cod's looking really good.
Brookie's Fish Market gets at least 2 fresh shipments every day.
Got the cold water lobster tails and then any of the snow crab clusters. I mean, you can see product of Canada.
Mohammed Jaroushi says they try to source domestically as much as possible, but at least 30 to 40% of the store's shellfish comes from Canada. It's hard to know, he says, exactly how 25% tariffs on Canadian imports would impact business.
Until we get the invoices in front of us with dramatic price changes, we won't be entirely certain, but just hoping for the best, going to plan accordingly and kind of play it by ear.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Adam Chase
I love fish.
is a regular at Coastal Seafoods in St. Paul.
It's going to be a giant impact for a lot of restaurants around here I know serve walleye.
Chase says he's not too worried about himself, but he is concerned tariffs would lead more people to struggle with higher prices.
There's so many people that this is going to, mean the difference between, whether they can just basically feed their families.
Is that all you needed today, guys?
Back at Brookie's,
Just playing it by ear and hoping we don't have to raise prices significantly.
Jaroushi says all they can do is continue hoping for the best
Filleting, scaling, skidding.
while doing what they know best.
Have a good rest of your day.
Well, meantime, President Trump is holding a meeting today with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer to discuss what's next for Ukraine in that country's ongoing war with Russia. Starmer is looking for security guarantees for Ukraine if a peace deal is eventually reached. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he's preparing to visit the White House tomorrow and is expected to sign a deal with Donald Trump. That deal gives the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for security from the U.S. Nick Patton-Walsh is at a rare earth mineral mine just west of Kyiv in Ukraine with a closer look at the deal.
Yeah, you join me at a titanium mine in Zhytomyr, to the west of Kiev in Ukraine. A critical earth mineral, some call it a rare earth mineral, and behind me is the huge volume of water used to blast into the ore. And you can see just them dropping off what they've scraped from one of the huge basins here. Look, this mine has its problems. Russian attacks on the electricity infrastructure here that keeps it running means sometimes they get 3 hours functionality a day, and the electricity is very expensive. All these elements really go into explaining how urgently Ukraine wants some kind of investment, but also too the complexity of how much money you might expect to get back from your immediate investment. They're not running on a profit here at all. And you also get a sense, I think, as well, of exactly the scale of what Ukraine might potentially be able to offer here. Titanium used in so many daily products that we have. Now, the deal in question, which is most likely to be signed before or during the Friday visit to the White House by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, is not that specific. It is a framework. It talks about creating a reconstruction and investment fund for Ukraine, and it talks about relevant resources. It doesn't specify what they are. It puts some things, says it won't be some things, but it says we'll define what is going to be included in a later fund agreement. They'll start negotiating as soon as this first one is actually signed. Complicated, yes, but I think that's a deliberate design to weave between the almost reconcilable positions we're really seeing here. President Trump on one side saying, I want debt repaid and I want it repaid using these natural resources. Zelensky saying, I don't recognize any of that money from the Biden administration as debt. It was grants, and I want to see this turning into something about investing in Ukraine as well. So that complexity really, I think, fudged around by this document that seems to get everyone over that obstacle. But that doesn't stop the major focus of Friday, which is getting President Trump and President Zelensky in the same room together, healing that horrific 10 days ago rift that began between them and enabling maybe the US-Ukraine relationship to get back on an evener keel. But that's a big ask in itself, as indeed is turning something like this, massive as it is, into a profit that gets near the billions of dollars, the $500 billion that President Trump initially said he wanted back from Ukraine.
Today, thousands of U.S. Agency for International Development workers who have been fired or placed on leave as part of the Trump administration's dismantling of the agency are starting to clear out their workspaces. This as the U.S. Supreme Court blocks a court order requiring the Trump administration to release billions of dollars in foreign aid. That money would have come from the USAID agency for foreign aid contracts and grants. Chief Justice John Roberts paused the U.S. District Court judge's ruling, giving the court more time to consider the administration's more formal request to block that aid outright. Roberts also asked organizations that contract or receive these grants from USAID to respond to the pause by noon tomorrow. Tonight, hundreds of newly released Palestinian prisoners are back with their families. Most of these people have been held in Israel since the October 7, 2023 attacks. Their release, part of a broader ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas that's been in effect since January. In exchange, the Hamas terrorist group released the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages believed to have been captured during the 2023 attack. The return of those bodies is the final handover that's been agreed upon in the first phase of the ceasefire deal. But as talks over a second and more difficult stage in the ceasefire have yet to begin, NBC's Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv with the very latest.
So overnight we saw the last part of the first phase of this tenuous truce between the Israelis and Hamas. There were hundreds of Palestinian prisoners who are being released from Israeli jails, while at the same time late last night we saw 4 dead bodies of slain hostages, Israelis, being released by Hamas from the Gaza Strip, transferred through the Red Cross. Now, this was a major step and one that wasn't always necessarily going to happen. We had seen the Israelis saying earlier in the week that they were not going to be releasing those hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. They said because they wanted to see Hamas put an end to what they called the humiliating ceremonies when it comes to handing over these prisoners. But at the same time now, it looks as though this truce, despite the fact that we've seen the last element in these 6 weeks of exchanges, doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be moving on to phase 2. We just heard Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has deployed diplomats to Cairo to try to negotiate a move from phase 1 to phase 2. That would see a more permanent truce and possibly the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip. But that was supposed to happen weeks ago, these negotiations. And if they don't happen within the next couple of days, both sides may return to war. Matt Bradley, NBC News, Tel Aviv.
Back at home, new this afternoon, a Buick that's been stuck in White Bear Lake for a month after breaking through the ice is finally out of the water. The car was reported through the ice on January 27th. You can see it right there. The driver was not hurt during the incident, but law enforcement told him he had 30 days to get the car out or be charged up to 5 times the original cost of a tow to get it out. Right at the buzzer, local towing company American Towing and Recovery stepped up to the plate and offered to pull that vehicle from the frigid waters for free. A month out from opening day, the Minnesota Twins are cementing their leadership changes heading into the 2025 season. Next Monday, clubhouse vet Derek Falvey will officially take over as president of baseball and business operations. He's replacing Dave St. Peter, who's held the role for over 2 decades. While St. Peter is stepping aside from his presidential duties, he is staying with the Twins as a strategic advisor. Falvey, who will be the team's 5th president, joined as executive vice president, chief of baseball officer in 2016, then was promoted to president of baseball operations in 2019. In his latest rise, Falvey becomes the first ever to hold the dual title of president of baseball and business operations. The Twins open their season on March 27th in St. Louis against the Cardinals. Check this out. You're not seeing double. That's Governor Walz and Jim Gaffigan about to take the stage last night at the Orpheum.
I tell you, I got to talk a little about the Runza sandwich tonight. I think, the food thing is a pretty big deal with me.
Now, you may remember Gaffigan being tapped to play Walls on SNL. Walls, there you see him returning the favor ahead of Gaffigan's first Minneapolis show. Well, stick with us. More news and weather's coming up after the break.